interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. Did you ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully.
Do you get your news from television, radio, or newspapers? Do you feel that, despite press releases, top stories, headlines, and sound bites, the news doesn't always give you the whole picture? Do you consider yourself a good, honest, tax-paying voting citizen? Do you hope that your bank has your best interest at heart? Do you sometimes feel that there's something hidden below the surface story of world events, but just don't have the time or energy to look into it? These questions may seem unrelated, but you will soon realize their correlation. So strap yourself in, and let's take a trip through time.
The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he can't believe it exists.
Understanding law and the words of law, there are two things that this planet has: water and earth, water and land. Consequently, there are two kinds of law: the law of the land and the law of water. You've heard the term law of the land, but in point of fact, that's precisely what this word means, law of the land, because it is the people who live on land. And that is opposed to something else called the law of the high seas, or the law of water. You need to understand the difference. The law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on the land. And so consequently, the law of the land is different in every country. You can do things in America you can't do in Russia. You can do things in Africa you can't do in England. So the law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on that particular land. However, there is a higher law that dominates the entire world. It's called the law of the water, or the law of the high seas. The law of water is referred to as the law of money. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, or where you live. Money is money. And anytime you're doing banking or using money, you are now under the law of water, maritime admiralty.
In the film, The Occult World of Commerce, Jordan Maxwell and Jason Whitney give a great overview explaining in depth the important differences between the two law systems, how they were merged, and how this affects how we live today. Countries' laws end at the borders of their land. It's also known as common law, the law of the common people. Now, proper English common law was originally based on the Ten Commandments section of the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, but it's also considered to be common sense law. The common law that's developed over time has but one purpose. That sole purpose is to protect our fundamental rights and freedoms of life, liberty, and property. The purpose of law was never to restrict or destroy our rights and freedoms. Its sole purpose, then and now, is for the preservation and protection of these gifts. Marine law, or the law of water, is the law of money, or currency. It is the law that governs all money in the world, and is the same type of law in every country with a central bank. It is also known as commercial law, covering all forms of commerce. You may not have heard of the Uniform Commercial Code, or the UCC, but it is the foundation of how all modern financial transactions are handled, and while very complex, understanding it gives a great insight as to how the banking game is played. Throughout history, law has been corrupted and used in many ways it was never intended to be used. Laws have also been created to control and enslave people for the sole benefit of those in power. Before the implementation of marine law, which was layered to exist over our already existing common law, in the United States of America, people were called sovereigns. That is, you were your own country. You were considered a soul, created by God, and you were born and owned your own body. Instead of a first and a last name, like you have today, you had what was called a Christian and family name. Not only did you own your own body, but you were completely responsible for it. You could use any substance you wished to your own benefit or peril. If two men consented to having a gunfight in the streets, to the death, it was their right as long as it was consensual. The sheriff would stand by to make sure no innocents got injured in what was a perfectly legal duel. Self-responsibility was the order of the day, which was either a blessing or a curse to the people. Common law ruled the land. Treat others the way you want to be treated, the real golden rule. Now, under common law, all interactions with your fellow man were and are some form of contract and consent. There were fewer layers of law in existence before the merging of common and marine law, and so, for example, there was no such thing as fraud, because as a sovereign who was personally responsible, at any time you could have said no. People had to be more diligent in who they dealt with, and thus, as reputation was actually considered important, people would try and honor their contracts and earn an honest living, using the court systems only for criminal prosecutions or contract disputes. Simpler times back then indeed, but also more primitive as well. Perhaps we're learning to say no again.
And if you look at the whole entire picture, the government is only your representative and representatives of your neighbors. So who are they to demand that you get a license in order to engage in an action which is fundamentally lawful? You need to understand there's legal and lawful, and there's illegal and unlawful. Legal means you are operating correctly by the form or by the letter of the law. Lawfully tends to speak to the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law.
The Founding Fathers of the United States desired people to have the right to life, liberty, and property, along with the free will to enjoy them and the responsibility to respect the rights of others. After fighting their revolution for freedom from colonialism, the founders were intelligent enough to retain a healthy fear of the similar threats posed by corporate power and wisely limited corporations exclusively to a business role. In the United States of America, up until around the mid to late 1800s, in order to create a company or corporation, you would have to go through the arduous process of earning a charter from a particular state, which was both limited in duration and function, needing to be renewed, but also subject to rules, regulations, and heavy taxes. They were also mandated to serve the public interest, with profit being the result to shareholders who were part of the public. If they exceeded their authority, went against their charter, or went against the public interest, a corporation's charter could be revoked, rendering it invalid, and essentially destroying it in the legal sense. The concept of corporate personhood came about around this time, which quickly gained popularity with business leaders. Discussed and dissected at length in the brilliant